Okay, good morning, and sorry for this delay, but we have some problems, some troubles we are going to begin just 25 minutes late. I'm sorry for this, and I welcome all of you here in this our conference room of the National Research Council of Italy, of our institute, the Institute for Research on and Innovation and Services for Development. I'm very proud and pleased and happy to host this event with my colleague Antonia Gravagnuolo and my colleague and my professor Luigi Fusco Girard, and the team that has worked and is working to this important project. So today we have this conference, Energy, Beauty, Participation, Cultural Heritage, Adaptive Reuse as driver of circular regeneration, sustainable regional development. So is a title very wide, and the themes are very important. And I think I was talking with Professor Fusco about the importance of beauty in this vision, beauty that is that joined with the functionality that is the main themes of the Bauhaus, of the old the old Bauhaus, is different, that is related to the role of the human being in our future, in the future of our countries inside Europe. So this is another step. This is on the road that began with Click, the first horizon that this team developed inside the CNR, and then Be.CULTOUR. And so I think this is a very important result for the team, but also for our institute. And so I thanks, first of all, I want to thank the team of CNR, because I wasn't able to be here in these days, but I received something like 50 emails about work and everything, the problem, how solve the problem. So very my congratulations to Antonia, to all the team, everybody that has worked to this wonderful, important project. And so a special thanks to Professor Fusco, that I'm pleased to know, and when I was in the University of Naples in the Faculty of Architecture, and I'm pleased to have him as our associate researchers. That it is very important, is a pillar in our organization that is aimed towards young researchers. But I think it's very important to have this approach that mix young people with professor, with competence, experience. And so I think this is a very good approach, and I think that you, and I ask to my colleagues, we are seeing the results just day by day. So welcome to all of you, and a warm good work in this great work today, and for the prosecution of the project. And I hope that you will enjoy this collaboration. Last of all, I hope that you have enjoyed the visit. I'm sorry that I wasn't be able to come with you in the catacomb, and I'm sure that the visit was fantastic, also because it's an important project that is developed by a group of young people in the neighborhood of the Sanità. And so I think it's a great, it has a great importance. It was a good choice to show this experience in Naples. So thank you again to all of you, and good work.
Thank you very much to our director. Thank you. I'm going to moderate a little bit these first sessions. So I'm Antonia Gravagnuolo from the CNR IRIS from the Institute. I have the pleasure this morning to introduce Jorge Nieto-Angulo, who is the project officer from the European Commission and the REA agency of the Be.CULTOUR project, the Horizon 2020 project that is organizing this event today. So without further delay, I would give the floor to Jorge for a little introduction about this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonia, and good morning to all, even though I don't see many. But so I have prepared a short presentation because Antonia and the consortium have asked me to do some introductory remarks. And I'll share my screen, just confirm that you can see it there. So normally you can see it, Antonia. So thanks a lot for inviting me to this event and to do like some introductory remarks. Also to present myself, as Antonia mentioned, I'm the REA project officer in charge of this project of Be.CULTOUR. So I'm working closely with the team. And Antonia asked me to present a bit the initiative, the NEB initiative, as well as the, let's say, the scope of the topic where Be.CULTOUR has been funded. So I'd like to start with some words by President von der Leyen, actually, about the initiative, about the NEB, which is basically to create synergies, to be a bridge between, on one side, the world of science and technology, and on the other side, about the world of art and culture. So basically, it is using the new European Green Deal, so aesthetic, and combining good design with sustainability. So actually, what is the NEB, or like 2 words on the NEB? Basically, the NEB, so the New European Bauhaus initiative, goal is to, let's say, put together, to create links between creative and interdisciplinary experiences, where some actors, where a lot of actors can collaborate, can work together, such as students, architects, artists, and scientists. And basically the goal of NEB is to use, again, the European Green Deal objectives, so to turn the European Green Renovation Project into a cultural movement. And actually, citizen involvement, citizen participation is essential. So I'm really glad to see that there are also a lot of speakers that will join later the discussions, because again, citizen participation is just the example about it. Then a word on Be.CULTOUR and Horizon 2020. So this project has been funded under the previous framework program, which was Horizon 2020. Now we are with Horizon Europe. But at that time, Be.CULTOUR was funded for specifically for the topic that dealt with innovative approaches to urban and regional development through cultural tourism. So basically, the scope of the action of this topic was to foster improvements in sustainable cultural tourism policies and practices, and also to foster progress in several aspects, such as growth, jobs, social and economic development of both, let's say, European regions, and not only urban, but also rural areas. And finally, a word on Be.CULTOUR itself. So basically, it puts, it's actually a nice example of European collaboration, because it involves 15 partners that do come not only from member states, but also from associated countries, as a duration of 36 months, so still running for some time. And actually, the importance is that it puts the human-centered approach at its core. So basically, this is key, and actually I would make the link with the NEB, because it contributes to cultural identity, and actually it also enhances the attractiveness of remote and peripheral sites that are not so well known. So at the end, this is definitely, there is a clear and definite link with the NEB's goal, which is to be a cultural movement. So with that, I would like to finish my introductory words, and I'd like to thank everyone. So I can stop sharing, and Antonia, it's back to you. Thank you.
for this introduction. So we hope that you will be able to stay with us a little bit following the streaming. I also take the occasion to say that the event is web streamed, so everyone can follow from remotely. So now, thank you very much, Jorge, again, and I would like to give the floor to Professor Luigi Fusco Girard for a little introduction, and then we will go directly to the first session with the first speakers. So just one moment, Professor Fusco Girard, please, the floor is yours.
Come si fa qui? Ah, sì, sì. Good morning and welcome to all of you. Yes, the title of this section is very rich. We are speaking about energy, we are speaking about beauty, about participation, about the new European Bauhaus, and also about the click outcomes. That means about adaptive reuse of cultural heritage for making the circular city. This means that si può proiettare qualcosa? No, no, si può. Non sono spariti questi cosi. Allora, we have many key issues, very many. First of all, the circular economy. What is which interpretation of the circular economy model? And which interpretation of the circular city is not already done? Is a process ongoing, which means adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is not a news, because all ecological works is characterized by the adaptive capacity. Life is adaptation. Cultural heritage. How, in which condition is it possible to shift the condition of the adaptive reuse to the cultural heritage? Is not done. Also, this is not done. The new Bauhaus, European Bauhaus. So this is the news. In which way we can combine all these issues? Questo si sente? Ah, sì, sì, ah, perfetto. Adesso sono emozionato, In which way we can combine ecco, the new European Bauhaus with all these topics, no? Because the new European Bauhaus invite all us to reshape our conclusions about circular city, circular model, so on and so on and so on. The next, please. Here, I would like to stress, in particular, the relationships between this list of issues and the click research outcomes using an European document. This document was done by the ministers, no? of European countries of urban affairs, and the name is the New Leipzig Charter. Why I would like to introduce in this perspective the outcome? This is strictly connected with the new European Bauhaus. There are three poles in this document, very interesting. The first pole is the transformative power of the city. The transformative power of the city. This means that the city have a great power to change, to transform the existent the state of art world. The second pole is the city as the space of interdependencies between the specific element and the general element in a circular way. It's possible to speak about the city without linking the particular with the general. And the third pole is much more interested, and I would like to stress it, is the common good. Three poles, the transformative powers, the city, and the common good. Why I stress this? Because all our research should be oriented to land into this direction. How is possible to implement, to achieve the common good for promoting a better way of life for all people? This is the real challenge we have today. So this is the image that I like to propose to you. This is the image of Ambrogio Lorenzetti about the common good. It is in Siena. The common good. And the common good is linked what to the good city. The good city. The city of the good government, of the good management. Today we speak in terms of good governance. This is the image. I invite you to see because they are splendid image, and they are able to speak us, to inform us. The click research. The click research, I interpreted the click research in the ecological perspective. The ecological perspective together with the human perspective. These are the two perspectives in which all the outcomes of click are organized. Why? And this is linked to the new European Bauhaus, because the ecological perspective shows us the adaptive capacity of natural ecosystem in the best way. Because the ecological perspective shows us the capacity to identify symbiosis between a tree and the mushrooms and so on and so on. And this is characterized, both are characterized by a circular process. Circularity is the organization of nature ecosystems that is able to survive in the secularum, millennia and so on, through the adaptive capacity and through symbiotic capacity. This means in cultural terms, through cooperation, collaboration, capacity to become in a reciprocal game together. This is not, this is important. Why? Because from this capacity, the beauty emerge. The beauty is the perception of the harmony of the circular adaptive ecosystems. The harmony is the message of nature, and the beauty is our perception. This is the same thing for, in my opinion, from the built environment. And I try to reorganize. Okay, these are two images I like very much, because this is the sources, le fonti del Clitunno, il fiume Clitunno, no? In Umbria. Come si dice? Fonti, sources of Clitunno River. I invite you in Umbria region because it's a wonderful landscape. It's not good, it's a wonderful landscape. And you understand what does it mean, the circular organization of nature. You touch with your eyes, with all of your sense, the circularity. Ecco. So, nel new European Bauhaus, non so questo per tutto sa, Bauhaus, the European Bauhaus invite us to shift the beauty not as an exceptional perception, in our experience, in the museum, in galleries, in art. No. The beauty is a characteristic of the day-by-day life in the city. Why? Because the beauty is linked to the public space, to the piazza, to the squares, to the roads, to the streets, to the and these are all public spaces. The beauty of public space invites us, and this is my conclusion, to interpret the beauty as an entrance point for an aesthetic, a civic or civil aesthetics, in which each inhabitant become able to combine creative way its particular interest with the general interest. We need this in this historical moment, and this means to contribute to common good. Thank you very much for your attention.
And before the session one, we have a speech of Andrew Potts, who is a representative of ICOMOS International and especially of ICOMOS Climate Heritage Initiative. So I thank very much, Andrew, for being with us. It's really a pleasure to host you in Napoli. And we are very happy that we had this occasion together. It's not usual that you are in Europe and in Italy, especially. So thank you very much for joining us. And I would like to give you the floor. Let me open your slides also. Ah, you have no slides. Okay, very good. Okay, so the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Antonia. Well, as you heard, my name is Andrew Potts, and I was formerly the coordinator of the Climate Change and Heritage Working Group of ICOMOS, and now I am the coordinator of Heritage Network. And it's a real pleasure for me to be here with you today, an honor to be here with Professor Fusco Girard and with you, Professor Gravagnuolo. I remember very well being here with with many of you 4 or 5 years ago. I keep coming back to Naples and to this team to learn new things and to keep engaged, because the work being done here, I think, is on the cutting edge of some important topics. And in fact, that's what I want to talk about for the next 30 minutes or so, precisely how important and how cutting edge this work that's being done here and the work that each of you is. Let me first just tell you briefly a little bit about the Climate Heritage Network. It was founded in 2019. It was founded by cultural institutions and cultural operators who felt like there was a hole, a gap in climate change planning and climate change policy and ecological transition planning and policy. And what was missing was culture. And at the same time, and not coincidentally, the cultural sector itself, arts, culture, heritage, was not sufficiently mobilized for climate action. We weren't doing everything that we could do to contribute to transformative climate action. And so the CHN was formed by people who wanted to change that. It was launched in 2019 in Edinburgh, Scotland. It now has 300 networks in it. It's a network of networks. So networks of libraries, networks of museums, networks of archives, networks of monuments. We're trying to do something a little complicated, which is to knit together the entire culture sector, including fine arts, performing arts, archaeology, cultural landscapes, creative industries, documentary heritage, music. So bringing together all these people. Why? To unlock the power of culture, to help people imagine and realize low carbon, just, climate resilient futures, and unlock the power of culture to help communities achieve the ambitions of the Paris Agreement. And so that's why the CHN was formed. Given all that, it probably won't surprise you that I'm going to frame my reactions to today's conference topic, through the lens of climate change. but I think it's a good lens to consider, to evaluate the topics that we're discussing today. And I will confess from the very beginning that I have a little bit of an agenda, a political agenda. I will reveal it up front. I will be transparent. And that is that I would like to ask the people in this room, the people watching us through the live streaming, to consider being even more explicit, even more bold in connecting your work to climate action than you already are being. I know many of you, I know that you are already well aware of the connections between your work and climate change and climate action, but I would like you to do even more and be even more explicit in these framings. So for example, the theme of today's conference, the title, Energy, Beauty, Participation, Cultural Heritage, Adaptive Reuse, Driving Circular Regeneration, and Sustainable Regional Development. If I had written it, I might have written Energy, Beauty, Participation, Cultural Heritage, Adaptive Reuse, Driving Circular Regeneration, and Sustainable Regional Development as climate action. Now, you may say, why? You know, why am I pressing on you the idea of being more intentional and even more intentional and explicit in framing your work as climate action? The reason is, and I think it's quite important, and I'm very serious about this. As I understand the work being done, people in this conference, at its heart are topics like reuse and repair and stewardship and circularity and living with change and inclusion and participation and adaptation. These things are central to your work, I think, but these things are also, these topics are the solution to climate change. The solution to climate change. And that may sound ridiculous, that I think the solution to the gigantic existential problem of climate change are these topics that you're working with, but I believe this. And I'm worried that the centrality of the work you are doing is not well enough recognized in heritage and in ministries of culture, but more importantly to me, not recognized in climate policy and in ministries of ecological transition. And this gap, this failure to recognize the importance, the centrality of the topics you're working with is happening at a moment of crisis when we absolutely cannot afford to miss opportunities. Literally, the fate of the planet, its people, and their heritage is hanging in the balance. And I want to spend a minute recounting the state of the situation with climate change. I think probably many of you are very familiar with this crisis, but it gets me to the main point I want to make in a moment. But just to say that it is a crisis, so much so that in 2020, ICOMOS, the International Council on Monuments and Sites, at its triennial General Assembly, declared a climate and ecological emergency. Why? One of the triggers, one of the reasons why ICOMOS chose that moment to declare a climate emergency is because in that time, in 2019, the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere had hit the highest level ever recorded. At the same time, we were seeing the real life consequences of that. You remember back to 2019, devastating wildfires, extreme heat, intense weather events, all happening at the same time. Now, if I recall correctly, in 2019, the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere that caused ICOMOS to declare a climate emergency, the concentration was 415 parts per million. Mind you, previously, 350 parts per million had been judged by climate scientists to be the upper limit of what was safe. And 400 was viewed as a red line, crossing that line, leading to climate catastrophe. And in 2019, we hit 415, and ICOMOS and many other people declared a climate emergency. Okay, jump forward to last month, May 2022. An announcement was made about the current concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Do you know what it is today? May 2022, 420 declared a climate emergency at 415, now 420. This is very likely the highest concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere in 4 million years. We have not had weather concentration like this in 4 million years. And it corresponds to a huge uptick in the amount of heat that is being added to the oceans and the atmosphere, which means more and faster melting ice caps, rising sea levels, more destructive weather events. So we're at 420 and rising. 450 parts per million, it would be the point in time when we lock in 2 degrees of global warming. We lock in a future where our planet is 2 degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels. Why is that important? 2 degrees. So the Paris Agreement, landmark Paris Agreement signed in 2015, created an internationally agreed goal of holding global warming to well below 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees. And in fact, the scientific consensus is now that that should be 1.5 degrees. Why? Because above 1.5 degrees, we have irreversible, catastrophic impacts to human and natural systems. And we are now on the cusp of irreversibly locking in 2 degrees of warming, not 1.5, 2, locking in irreversible and catastrophic. ICOMOS, for its part, also has called for people to pursue 1.5 degree pathways. Now, why ICOMOS? Why would ICOMOS, a cultural heritage organization, specifically adopt the view that we have to hold warming below 1.5 degrees? The reason is because if you downscale the climate models for many places, many heritage places, many sites, many monuments, what we see is that the impacts at 2 degrees of warming are such that those sites simply cannot adapt. Every place has a limit to its adaptive capacity, and many places cannot adapt to the impacts of 2 degrees of warming. To talk about local adaptation to 2 degrees of warming for these sites is just fantasy. It can't be done, at least not in any sense of in situ conservation that we understand. And by the way, this is why in the current draft of the new UNESCO World Heritage Policy on Climate, it's only a draft, but in the current draft, it says that the implementation of a precautionary approach that pursues pathways limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius with no or limited overshoot is the most effective approach for the protection, conservation, and management of cultural and natural heritage. You want to safeguard heritage? Work to hold global warming to 1.5 degrees, because above that, there's a lot of stuff we cannot save. So we now are at the point where we are about to lock in 2 degrees of warming with no possibility of, in our lifetime or our children's lifetime, to get back to 1.5. And so this is a big problem. And you might be wondering, you might be incredulous at this news. How could the concentration of greenhouse gases, how could the climate change problem be actually getting worse? I know it hasn't gotten enough better, but how could it be getting still worse given everything we're doing about climate change? I mean, which topic do you hear more about climate change? Every corporation, every government, they claim they're working on climate change, and yet the problem is actually still getting worse. We haven't gotten to the point where it started to get better. There was an influential article that was released just before the UN climate conference in 2021, COP26 in Glasgow, entitled 3 Decades of Climate Mitigation, Why Haven't We Bent the Global Emissions Curve? It was authored by a bunch of folks. The lead author was Professor Isaac Stoddard at Uppsala University. Kevin Anderson, a very famous climate scientist, was an author. And I want to read you a short quote from their article where they describe one of the key reasons why they think we have failed to successfully mitigate climate change. They say it's because of the nature of climate planning and climate policy. They say current climate planning and climate policy tends to prioritize large-scale, simple technological and market-based solutions, but it generally falls short at capturing factors that are less easy to model or quantify. Systemic, uncertain, or contested aspects, often related to social, political, and ethical issues and trade-offs, are likely to be excluded. Rather, a narrow suite of technological options for reducing greenhouse gas emissions are emphasized, with typically limited representation of demand-side options. Limited representation of demand-side options, and by the way, demand-side options, that's the way people live, or more far-reaching changes to socio-economic structures. So what they're saying is that there's a big hole in climate policy and planning, and what it skips is one, the social and historical and economic phenomena that had given us climate change, colonialism, globalism, no attempt to tackle the origins of climate change, and it skips ecological and human dimensions of climate crisis. It skips people-centered, place-based approaches. And they say that is why we have not succeeded in bending the emissions curve. And if you were in Glasgow at COP26, you saw this in real time. So at the UN climate conferences, every day is a theme day, like Mobility Day and Buildings Day. So on Food Day, what do you think they were talking about in Glasgow on Food Day? They were talking about genetically modified crops. They were talking about laboratory grown meat. Here's what they were not talking about: agroecology. And in fact, the state parties refused to include the word agroecology in their final communique. They voted it down, the idea. There was a transport day, and on transport day, they talked about electric vehicles, almost exclusively. Not walking, not cycling, not land use, not how traditional settlement patterns promote mixed use, dense, walkable places where you don't need a car. This was not the topic of transport day. Buildings Day at the COP, it was about new buildings mostly. When existing buildings were discussed, they were framed as a problem that had to be solved quickly through technological innovation. Embodied carbon was talked about almost not at all. And when it was talked about in the context of the supply of newly engineered material for construction. And so my point is, this absence of people-centered, place-based approaches, it's not hypothetical, it's real. And so to get back to the point of today's conference and to focus on circularity, as Professor Fusco Girard was doing a minute ago, I do think climate policymakers are focused on circularity. It's a topic you hear a lot about in climate policy and climate planning from ministries of ecological transition. But what they mean by it is market systems and the way those market systems impact individual consumer choice. What I almost never hear in the climate change conversation is any discussion of what were we told a moment ago? Common good. I never hear that. Circular city. I mean, the idea of circular economy that is presented is a very meager one, shallow one. So in that paper I mentioned, Professor Stoddard et al., they go on to argue that we have to solve a big problem if we're really going to tackle climate change. And that is, we have to address a pervasive failure in industrialized societies to imagine desirable ways of living that are neither wedded to the carbon economy nor dependent on narratives of progress reliant on perpetual economic growth. Transformative change, climate change, it's so all-encompassing, the future will be so different than it is in this moment that we really can't even imagine. Most people, most policymakers can't imagine what that world looks like, literally cannot imagine. They don't have a mental image of what it looks like. And they say that it is this failure that has been critical to enabling the persistence of business as usual approaches, incremental approaches, which by the way are the enemy of transformative change. And that is why we have not bent the emissions curve. They say that the climate change discourse suffers from what they call, and this is a mouthful even for a native English speaker, an epistemological monoculture. Epistemological monoculture. We simply don't have the capacity to imagine and talk about ways of living that are not wedded to the carbon economy. And so what we end up with under the banner of climate action is incremental change, which falls short of transformative change, which might be okay if we had a lot of time, which we absolutely do not. And so what I want to stress here is that this is precisely where your work could come in, where your work fits in. Cultural heritage, adaptive reuse as driver of circular regeneration and sustainability. This is the antidote to business as usual thinking. This is a challenge to the epistemological monoculture of climate policy. Cultural heritage, cultural landscapes, heritage buildings, traditional knowledge that predate the carbon era or that work independently of our addiction to fossil fuels. These can point the way to post-carbon living. Pre-carbon living can point the way to post-carbon living. The worldviews and interpretations of development held by indigenous peoples and also local communities that were never co-opted by modern take-make-waste approaches offer counterpoints to prevailing but unsustainable paradigms of progress. Artistic, creative, and imaginative tools support a profound examination of inherited assumptions and hold the potential to help us transformatively reinterpret the mindsets that have given us climate change. And so to stick to my opening point, what I believe is that all of these ideas are prominent in much of the work I see in the fields that you are involved in. In fact, in the work of colleagues in this room. But I would love to see that framing be made more explicit. And if I could be so bold, I might even suggest that you consider writing the sentence, the thing I'm working on, fill in the blank, whatever it is, this helps people imagine life in a climate resilient, more just, post-carbon world in the following ways, ... Just answer the question, because I know your work does answer the question, and a lot of people aren't trying to answer the question. And I think, I know we're in the framework of the Festival of the New European Bauhaus. I think there's a little bit of a risk that some participants in the new European Bauhaus will sort of drift away from what I think of as the original impetus of the new European Bauhaus, which is to connect aesthetics and design and beauty and togetherness to ecological transformation. A little bit of a risk that we sort of drift away from that Green Deal climate action part. Don't do that. It's more important than ever that you center the work that you're doing around ecological transition, around transformative climate action. So this is the first thing that I wanted to tell you. And then in the final few minutes I have left with you, I want to just share a few additional thoughts on ways, on topics I think we need to grapple with, topics I think are relevant to your work that you're already grappling with, that have something to say about how successful we can be in leveraging the power of culture and heritage to aid in transformative climate action. And the first thing I want to highlight is that I think we need to be very honest about the fact that cultural heritage is part of the solution to climate change, yes, but culture and heritage, it's also part of the problem of climate change. It's called anthropogenic climate change for a reason. It's caused by people. It's not just caused by individual actors making atomized choices. It's caused by cultural values and preferences that have given us climate change. We've been in the middle of the Industrial Revolution for hundreds of years now. We now have many multi-generational lifestyles and values, at least in industrialized countries, that are themselves deeply entangled with fossil fuels, with take-make-waste approaches, and with the extractive and the colonial systems that have given us climate change. The environmental anthropologists, they have a word for this. They call them petroculture. Petroculture, culture that's deeply entangled with fossil fuels. And we've been deeply entangled with fossil fuels for a long time now. And so we've actually made a lot of places, a lot of landscapes, which themselves are deeply entangled with fossil fuels. And environmental anthropologists call those carbonscapes. This is the heritage of the Anthropocene. And we have to ask ourselves as cultural professionals, how do we engage with the heritage of the Anthropocene? I mean, I am guilty of cherry picking, as we say in English, the nice ways that cultural heritage supports climate action. But I mean, we're either cultural heritage experts or we're not. And if we are cultural heritage experts, we need to deal with the aspects of culture and heritage, which are the problem of climate change. And we have a lot of experience, right? I mean, the reason why Hiroshima and Robben Island and Auschwitz are World Heritage Sites, because we have to deal with the difficult and painful parts of our heritage. And I would suggest to you that the heritage of carbon is a difficult and painful part of our human tradition that has given us the existential crisis of climate change and an unprecedented extinction biodiversity crisis as well. And we have some tools for dealing with difficult heritage, right? In the United States, many heritage professionals are engaged with interpreting the heritage of human slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. And we now document and identify and interpret and present to the public and challenge the legacies of human slavery. And this is illustrative, I think, of the approach that we are going to have to bring to carbonscapes and to the heritage of climate change. And I know you, in your own work in circularity, I mean, you encounter places, traditions, paradigms where circularity existed but is lost or is so hard to reestablish. Why? Because the people you're working with, the communities you're in, are immersed in petroculture. And so it is hard for them to break the grip of inherited petroculture and reestablish or create circular economy. We need to not skip over that part, the part of the culture that is the problem. We need to challenge it, identify it, interpret it for the public, put up signs about it, wayfinders, you know, we need to deal with that. So that's the first thing I want to mention. The second thing I want to do is just stop for a moment on this topic of sustainable development. Maybe you saw that maybe a month ago, about 250 scholars signed an open letter to the United Nations asking them to withdraw the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. They said the SDGs have been a failure. They are counterproductive. They lock in unsustainable ideas of progress, perpetual growth, measured by GDP. It's the exact wrong thing we need in this moment. We just need to start over, they said. So this is obviously a polemic. It's quite provocative. And I'm not going to try to express an opinion about it in this moment. But what I do want to say is that we have gotten into a situation where we sort of have one bucket, one box, which is sustainable development, and one box, which is climate action. And somehow these two things are not the same. But it just can't be that way. We can't have efforts to create better livelihoods and have better health and tackle poverty and inequality that are carbon intensive. And we certainly can't spend $1 trillion retrofitting 30 million square meters of real estate in Europe for energy efficiency and not get any improvement in the quality of life of those spaces or the healthiness of those spaces. I mean, these agendas have to be merged, and there shouldn't be anything under the banner of sustainable development that's not also promoting climate adaptation and mitigation. And there shouldn't be climate adaptation and mitigation projects that aren't improving outcomes of human health, well-being, tackling inequality and poverty. So merge these agendas. There is a paradigm for this. It's called CRDP, Climate Resilient Development Pathways. It's the merger of these two. And I think we very much need to migrate to this paradigm in cultural heritage. It took us a while, powered by SDG 11.4, to really take on board sustainable development as a framework for cultural heritage. But now I'm telling you, we need to pivot a bit again and not have a separate path where we try to think about climate change and cultural heritage, but rather merge these two. And when you think about them together, you see that there are conflicts. And I think the people in this room will know that very well, because there's probably no better case study of the conflict between what passes as sustainable development, but what is not climate friendly, and that is tourism. So Of course, I mean, we're Be.CULTOUR. There are models of tourism. That, first of all, of course, there are important, fantastic, great things about tourism, intercultural understanding, livelihoods. Tourism is good for climate action because it actually, many people from comfortable global north places go to places on the front lines of climate change and see it, and it develops empathy. And it actually strengthens climate response. But we know that there are a lot of models of tourism that are not sustainable, that are essentially extractive, neo-colonial, greenhouse gas intensive models. And this can't be called sustainable development. And nor should we really even try. What we have to focus is on the dual metrics of climate action and sustainable development. And then you start to weed out, you start to drop out some things which are being sold to us as sustainable development, which are not, and some of this is in tourism. And to conclude, I want to just mention one other topic, and it comes again from the title of today's conference on this topic of participation. Togetherness, I think, is a word that New European Bauhaus uses. Inclusivity. This is critical to unlocking the power of culture and heritage to drive climate action. The culture and heritage methodologies and practice are participatory and support inclusive approaches. And I think we all know that there have been historically methodologies in the professional practice of cultural heritage that have not been these things. And to the extent those are perpetuated, top-down, expert-driven, non-inclusive heritage methodologies, this is the enemy of climate action. This is inhibiting the ability of cultural heritage to be a solution to climate change. Antonia and I participated in a project now 6 years ago in Quito, Ecuador. Quito was the host of the United Nations Decennial World Congress on Sustainable Urbanism called Habitat 2. It's actually where I met Luigi, and I'll never forget, we were planning for many months to go to Quito, and Luigi was carrying around this pamphlet, which was the outcome document of Habitat 2. We were going to Habitat 3. Habitat 2 is in 1996. And he had a copy that he had it like earmarked with all his favorite passages, and he kept taking it out and quoting it. And so we planned this event in Quito, and essentially Quito is a World Heritage City. It was actually the first Krakow. Quito and Krakow were the first World Heritage Cities ever created. And the UN Congress, Decennial Congress on Sustainable Urbanism, was in Quito. So we were thinking, how are we going to use this as a laboratory to test some of our favorite proposals for cultural heritage-based sustainable development? And the city of Quito came back to us and they said, you know what? The neighborhood that is the host of the Congress Center, the building, your meeting, 40,000 delegates are meeting in a building. That neighborhood is a historic neighborhood, but it's not the Baroque 17th century World Heritage. It's in the buffer zone. It's a 19th century streetcar neighborhood. And maybe we could focus on that. It's more vernacular. It's kind of more relatable. They said, but the neighborhood has already been surveyed by the National Monuments Commission of Ecuador. They already have a list. The neighborhood has 28 monuments, they told us. So we kind of already know what the heritage is. But the local head of the Heritage Commission, the local commission, said, why don't we not use the list of the 28 monuments that the National Monuments Commission says is the heritage of this neighborhood? The neighborhood was called Alameda, La Alameda. Said, why don't we do Hull? Why don't we do a historic urban landscape workshop here and ask the people what they think the heritage of their neighborhood is? And we spent 6 months, they spent 6 months in a participatory mapping exercise. They gave children chalk and they asked them to draw on the sidewalk a picture of what they love about their neighborhood. They surveyed homeless people in the park. They surveyed people who left the neighborhood, who moved away, asking them, what do you love about your neighborhood? What do you value about your neighborhood? And in the end, they came up with a list of about 30 elements, which the city committed that whatever the neighborhood said they loved about their neighborhood, the city would valorize as the heritage of the neighborhood in government policy. They would not limit themselves to the 18 monuments identified by the National Monuments Commission of Ecuador. And amazingly, of the I think my number keeps changing, I think it was 18. Of the 18 monuments, the local people identified 17 of them as things they loved about their neighborhood, 17 of the 18. But there were also 14 more, which included a big rock where people had a tradition of proposing marriage. It included a cluster of old trees that people loved to get shade under, street food, multi-generational street food, festivals. So in the end, they ended up with this list that was about half intangible heritage and half tangible heritage. The official list was only tangible heritage. And so you get here to ending now, and this is my point, a big difference between their official list of heritage and what the people said they valued about their neighborhood. Now, which of those two lists, the 18 monuments or the 28, which includes 17 monuments, but also ecological knowledge, knowledge about why people get along so well in the neighborhood, things people love, which of these two lists are more useful in planning climate strategy, in building social cohesion, in driving resilience, adaptation, all the things we have to do to address climate change? Well, it's the second list, the list that was arrived at through participatory and inclusive processes. So this idea of centering participatory processes in heritage, I mean, it's good for a lot of reasons, social justice, equity, those things all are foundational to the effectiveness of cultural heritage and the work we do to tackling climate change. So to conclude, I want to tell you that I went in September. It was the first time I traveled abroad after 2 years because of the pandemic. I went to Izmir, Turkey for the UCLG, United Cities and Local Governments Culture Summit. So it's a meeting of the municipal bureaucrats from monuments commissions and arts councils of city governments and regional governments around the world. And the opening address was made by the mayor of Izmir, a fellow called Tunç Sawyer. And Mayor Sawyer said, that in his opinion, economy without culture is what has given us climate change. It is the cause of climate change, economy without culture. So I similarly think that circular economy without culture, without circular culture, without the common good, is what is going to give us 3 degrees of global warming. We're not going to stay at 1.5 with ideas of circular economy, with technological and market-driven climate solutions that are not people-centered, are not place-based, are not rights-based. The work you're doing, the people in this room have the secret sauce, the hidden knowledge that can turn this around, and I want you to use it. And that's what I have. That's my message for you here today. And thank you, Antonia, for having me.
Thank you, Andrew, for your passionate speech. Thank you. So it was great to hear about your experiences. And I also wanted to highlight one work that you led with ICOMOS and Europa Nostra about the cultural heritage green paper, European Cultural Heritage Green Paper, which seeks to introduce the role of cultural heritage in the European Green Deal, which is a very important aspect because, as you say, the cultural heritage and cultural landscapes have a role, and our culture is what created, let's say, the climate change, but it's also what can foster the transition towards a more resilient future. So I thank very much for all these experiences and concepts that you put on the table, and for the call for action for us, for the researchers and for the members of the society, different stakeholders who really need to cooperate to achieve this shift in the mindset. This is what you really highlighted, that a shift of mindset is needed, not only a technological, of course, technologies are needed, energy, renewable energy sources are needed, but this without a culture, without a human-centered approach, what we call it, it's not enough. So really thank you for highlighting these aspects. And I hope that the other speakers will be very stimulated by your introduction, I'm sure.
Well, thank you very much, Antonia.